Well, good morning. Let me just take a moment to thank the elders for the opportunity. They go out of their way to make sure that the members have an opportunity to stand before you, even when we have two capable men who proclaim the gospel full time to us, and as we bring on another young man to sit at their feet, it's still important for them to make times like this, and that's not a light thing that they do. And we thank you. Thank you for giving up your time and making that available for us to be able to stand before you. And I'm going to tell you the crux of why I chose the lesson I'm going to choose now. Have you ever wondered, does God see me? Does he even know that I exist? And I know intellectually, we know he does. But sometimes it doesn't always feel that way, does it? And so the lesson that I have is going to run a dichotomy between how great God is and how much love he has for each one of us. And we're going to find that no matter what happens, we don't fall through the cracks to a God who is pretty amazing, far beyond what we can comprehend to understand. And I'm going to trust the people upstairs to go ahead and turn me on. There we go. So I entitled this lesson, "The Heavens Declare the Glory of God." And we know Psalms 19 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork." And there's probably not a generation that has ever existed that can peer into the truth that we're going to be talking about more than our generation. We're going to look at some pretty amazing things about what this really means, that the sky above proclaims his handiwork. But I want us to see his glory, not just with our eyes, but with our hearts, as we try to wrap our minds around how big everything is. It really can defy our understanding. We get up every morning and we go outside on a clear day and we see the sun rise and we see the light scattered across the sky. In our generation, we know that beyond that, there are billions and billions of more stars that exist. And beyond those stars, there are billions and billions of galaxies more that exist. And the truth of the matter is, from a human standpoint, a human perspective, sometimes our minds just give up trying to count, trying to comprehend the vastness of what God has created. Because creation doesn't whisper smallness. It shouts glory to its creator. It's as if God designed the heavens and created the heavens to stretch our imagination until it breaks. Perhaps just so we see how small we really are and how great our God truly is. So to get us into the flow of what we're going to be talking about, let's do our best to try to understand the scale of what God created. I'll go ahead and get this. So as we see on the first slide here, we have a comparison between the earth that we inhabit. Many of us have traveled the earth, and we know how long a flight can take, and we know how much time it takes for us to move to one place to another. But look at the scale when we compare what Earth looks like to the largest planet in our solar system, Jupiter. The famous red dot that's on there is actually a storm that's been brewing for over 300 years, and you can take the Earth and it almost fits perfectly in there. That shows you how big that massive storm really is. And yet, Jupiter is by far from being the largest thing in our solar system. The sun is the king of everything. Now, some of the scales I'm going to be showing you, they're really going to be hard to see on this, and that's by design. If you look down at the bottom, you see all the planets lined up. You can't see Earth because Earth is so small in scale to the sun that it almost is just a speck or a dot on the picture here. And even the great planet Jupiter is dwarfed by what God made. Again, can we wrap our minds around the scale of what God has done? But it gets more amazing. Our sun is called a yellow dwarf star. It's called a dwarf star for a reason. There are some bigger things in the universe than our sun. But we can compare it to a dwarf blue star, Sirius A, and it's roughly twice the size of our sun. Now the planets are down there. I don't know if you can see them. There's a couple of dots next to the sun. Pretty soon those planets are going to go away, and let me give you a heads up. Pretty soon the sun's going to disappear on this map as we look at the comparisons, because Sirius A is still a dwarf star. There are things in the universe bigger than Sirius A. We look at some other stars. There is you can't even see it here, but the second, you see our sun. I couldn't even see a dot when I looked closely at it. That next one is Sirius A. It's still a dot. You can't see it. These are some other big stars that are in our universe. And then we get into Betelgeuse. You probably have heard a lot about Betelgeuse in the news lately. They're thinking it's going to go supernova, and we may even be able to see that if it happens in our lifetime during the daytime sky. And then you have Antares. You're talking about red giants that dwarf even the sun. This is what our God made. We're going to talk more about this here in just a moment. But up until recently, there was a star called Stephenson 218. And Stephenson 218, for a long time, was considered the largest star that we're able to find in the universe. As a couple of weeks, this slide is out of date because through the James Webb Space Telescope a few days ago, we found an even bigger star. But at the time that we had this, Stephenson 218, look at the massive scale of how big that star is compared to the dot. I had to draw an arrow and label it just so you could see what the sun would look like when God created the universe. But perhaps this will help you appreciate it even more. And God created the stars also. As I said, during the time that I put this together, Stephenson 218 was considered the biggest of the known stars in the universe. 2,100 of our own suns could fit across the diameter of this star. And as we marvel at the scale, it's worth remembering something remarkable. God just didn't scatter these galaxies across the heavens and leave them for us to wonder about. He put into man curiosity and the ability to continue to learn and to explore his creation. And in our generation, he's actually allowed us to see his handiwork in a way that no other generation could ever see it. You remember the Hubble Space Telescope? Well, a few years ago, we launched the James Webb Space Telescope. And that gave humanity a new window into the depths of his creation. Scientists took this telescope that was put 1 million miles away from the Earth. Think about that. The moon is 250,000. This is 4 times the distance that the moon is. Now, I'm not a scientist, and I can't explain it to you, so if you ask me, I'm just, duh. That's going to be my answer. But it's sitting at a point called the Lagrange point, which, as I understand it, is somewhere between where the moon's gravity, the Earth's gravity, and the sun's gravity all comes together, and it keeps it kind of stationary in this place 1 million. miles away. Brilliant minds were able to do this. They say if anything goes wrong with it, there's no way to get anything out there to fix it. That's how far away it is. But it's away from Earth light, it's away from all these other things, and it can point in very, very isolated areas, and we can get images. And we can have instruments that can dissect the light of these stars in ways we were never able to do before. And what we found out when we launched this caused everything that we know as humans to change. When they launched James Webb Space Telescope, scientists were excited because they said, we're going to be able to look back at some of the most ancient light during the dawn of the birth of the universe. And if you believe in the Big Bang, and this is the way that everything happens, there are going to be some predictions that will come along with this that they expected the James Webb Space Telescope to show. They said that you're going to see a few galaxies because it takes a long time for galaxies to form. So you're not going to see many galaxies when we point our telescope back at light that is that ancient. And not only that, it takes a long time for the structure of the galaxies we look at to form. And so if you look at the Milky Way, the beautiful spiral galaxies, the Andromeda galaxies, according to the model of our scientists who believe in the Big Bang, those galaxies take billions of years to form. And if we were going to look back at light that was only 300 million years after the beginning of the universe, we shouldn't be able to see any of those galaxies. There just is not enough time, according to those models, for those galaxies to form. And then population 3 stars, that's all they expected to find. Population 3 stars, that's what scientists name stars that have no heavy metal makeup to them. They're made of lighter elements like helium and hydrogen, perhaps a few molecules of lithium, and that's about it. Because according to that model, it takes billions of years for these elements to fuse and form in any type of collection that we can count that are needed to make the kind of stars that we see today. So they were really excited. Now, a few weeks ago, I had the privilege of meeting an astrophysicist who is a young Earth creationist. So he believed that God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, literal days, and he believes that this happened around 6,000 years ago. And so before the first images came back from the James Webb Space Telescope, he had some predictions of his own, coming from someone who had the worldview that God created everything a few thousand years ago and spoke everything into existence. Pretty much he predicted before the pictures came back the opposite of what the scientists said. He said if God did create everything then, you would see a lot of galaxies because he created everything at once. And that when you pointed the James Webb Space Telescope back, you would see some large galaxies, just like we see today. And you would see fully formed, highly structured galaxies because that's the way God made it 6,000 years ago. And he said you wouldn't see a vast number of population 3 stars. You would see the stars with the same makeup as stars we see today because God made everything 6,000 years ago the way that we see it now. So they launched the James Webb Space Telescope. Those predictions started coming out in February of the year it was launched. And then in July, we get our first deep field picture back from the James Webb Space Telescope. Now, mind you, they took a blank, dark piece of sky that we were never able to see anything in. And they pointed the James Webb Space Telescope in this darkness that was the size of a grain of sand held at arm's length. And they focused it in on that tiny piece of sky. And the image on the screen is what came back as the first deep field image from the James Webb Space Telescope. And they were not expecting this. But Dr. Jason Lisle, the astrophysicist I told you about, this is exactly what he expected to see from these images. It wasn't just a few galaxies. Each one of those pinpricks of light in that picture is not a star, it's a galaxy. And each one of those pinpricks of stars contains lights contain hundreds of billions of stars, hundreds of millions of stars. It was just the opposite of everything that our scientists expected to find. They found many galaxies, the same thing you would expect if you believe God created the heavens and the earth 6,000 years ago. And the James Webb Space Telescope found very large, mature galaxies, spiral galaxies. Galaxies, according to their models, just could not have existed in that period of time. Very highly structured galaxies. They have instruments on the James Webb Space Telescope that can actually break down the light of stars and galaxies. And you can see the composition of what makes it up. I can't explain it to you. I'm sure there are people in this audience that probably could. They can explain to you how we can tell what makes up a star by looking and analyzing its light. I'm told we can do it. And we found heavy metals that made up these stars that are so far out that according to our own scientific models could not have existed. But if you believe God created the heavens and the earth 6,000 years ago, this is what you would have expected to see. And so what you have is a clash of worldviews. You have a clash of evolutionists who believed in the Big Bang that expected one thing, and those who believe that God created the heavens and the earth expected to see something different. And James Webb Space Telescope is just a tool, that's all it is. It doesn't have a worldview. It doesn't really care what we think one way or the other. It's just going to show us what is. And what it showed us, and every discovery that came after it so far, proclaimed and confirmed what Genesis said from the very start. The universe came into existence not by accident or an explosion, but by the voice of its creator. And we'll look at that a little more. There are words floating around in the scientific community right now like anomaly, problem, catastrophe, and people are scrambling to try to make sense of what we're seeing right now. Incidentally, Dr. Jason Lisle, he even predicted what the evolutionists would say when the James Webb Space Telescope brought back these kind of images. They would say things like, well, I guess our timeline is a little off. Perhaps the universe is a lot older than what we thought. Or perhaps it doesn't take nearly as long to form stars and galaxies as we thought. Maybe our models are off. But as he predicted, the one thing they never did entertain was, well, maybe a creator did create it. And so you see the scrambling and you see the movement going. And we're going to dive into some things that I think are even more great, because remember, God created this. And he created things, as we're going to see, that are really going to be hard for us to wrap our minds around. But the theological truth I'm going to share with you, I think, is even more astounding. And that's really what I can't wait to get to. We spent the last few minutes gazing outward into the farthest reaches of the universe. And everywhere we looked, God's glory was on display. But here's what's remarkable. as vast as the heavens are, and I hope you walk away with this message, if nothing else. They were not his main focus during the week of creation. When God created all the power and the beauty, his attention wasn't centered on the galaxies and the stars. It was centered on a small blue planet that he was preparing for his image bearers to dwell. In Isaiah 45:18, Isaiah tells us this truth. He formed the earth and made it. He did not create it empty. He formed it to be inhabited. He created the earth for us. He created the earth as a place and a home for his greatest creation to dwell. The universe declares his glory. But I want to posit to you this morning that the earth declares his purpose. This is where his attention rested, and this is where his image dwellers would dwell. When we read Isaiah's words that God formed the earth to be inhabited, it's here where we begin to see the Creator's heart. Again, it wasn't simply to display his power. He was preparing a home. And this is what's amazing to me. This, to me, is what's most remarkable about this. For 5 days of the creation, 5 of the 6 days before God rested, he focused his attention on this blue dot. He shaped the oceans and the mountains. He filled the skies with the bird and the lands with life. And every detail was crafted for a purpose and care, because this is where his image bearers would dwell. Then, after devoting nearly the entire week of creation, forming the planet for us, he turned his attention outward for just one day, on day 4. And that's when he spoke the universe into existence. Everything that we've looked at so far, everything that we marveled at, the great scale of the stars and the galaxies and everything we looked at in one day, God took time out of creating the earth and in one day spoke the entire universe into existence. And the Bible tells us on day 4, and God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the nights. And almost as an afterthought. And he made the stars also. All on day 4. All that vastness came from one day's work. He simply spoke it, and it was so. Let me ask you a question. The greater light was the sun. The lesser light was the moon. The stars, the planets, the asteroids, everything else that he ever made, he created on this one day. When did God create light? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. On day 1, God said, "Let there be light." For 3 days of the existence of the earth, before the universe ever existed, before any of those stars ever existed, before any galaxies was formed, you had earth with light. What did he create on day 3? The plants, the vegetation, everything that lives from light. It wasn't until day 4 that God created the sun and then gifted the sun the light that he had already created to sustain earth and life with. It was almost as if God knew that man, from the beginning, would spend time worshiping the sun. Ra, the sun god of the Egyptians. Almost every culture looks at the sun and they see the power, they see the life-giving force of the sun, and they tend to want to worship that. It was almost as if God was making a purposeful distinction to wait until day 4 to show people, no, light comes from me, life comes from me. I am the sustainer of life. I give what is needed. And then he gifted that light to the sun to be the one from that point on to take over. And he did that all on day one. And we cannot walk away with any other understanding than that God meant he was to be the one worshipped for his might. We just read that God made the stars and the moon and the sun, and he did it all in a single day. And if that doesn't take our breath away, let's consider this. Perhaps we've not stopped long enough to really think what that means. All the light that we see in every star that we studied or every galaxy that we've marveled at, all of it created in a moment of time at his command. If we were to try to count what he created on that single day in day 4, I suggest to you that the scale would leave us speechless. How many stars on that single day 4 did God create in the vastness of all the universes, the billions of universes that are out there? I can write the number, and I can give you the name of it. I have no concept how big it is. It's the number 200 followed by 21 zeros. People smarter than me estimate that this is how many stars exist in the known universe. I don't know how they do it. No one sat down and counted it. There's no calculator or supercomputer that can do that. But they have a way of estimating, and that's really all it is an estimation. 200 billion trillion stars, all created on day 1. I'd love to see a show of hands. Can anyone comprehend what that number is, how big that number is? If you can, you're a lot smarter than me. That's a lot of stars. Remember in Genesis when God said he caused the animals to go before Adam and said, Adam, I want you to name all the animals, and he did. What do you think would happen if God took all the stars and brought them to Adam and said, Adam, I want you to name all the stars? I want to tell you that would have been an impossible task, and here's why. I did a thought experiment, and I'm like, okay. And I had to use some computers to help me think this through. I said, let's assume that God wanted us to name all the stars. What would that take? And so I did some research and found out that in the human language, we have doctors in the audience, we have lawyers in the audience, we have engineers in the audience. If you count every English word that exists, we have probably one of the most prolific languages that has ever been created. We have about 1 million unique words in our language. And that counts all of the medical terms, the engineering terms, the legal terms, all the specialized terms that are out there. We have about 1 million. Most other languages don't come close to being as prolific as ours. And currently on Earth, we have a little over 8,000 languages that are spoken. So I said, okay, let's be generous. Let's assume that these 8,000 plus languages that exist on Earth today have 1 million words, which they don't, but let's assume they do. And let's also assume that they don't overlap. There are no words that are identical. They're all unique words. We're not even close to being able to have enough words of all of the words that exist on the earth spoken today to name all the stars that God created. So I said this, computer, how many languages existed from the beginning of time when man started talking? And computer came back and said, Tony, there's about 31,000 languages that have ever existed. I said, okay, let's be generous and say that each one of those languages had 1 million unique words that were different from every other language. And if we were to take all the words that humanity has ever created to speak, and we were to use those words to give a name to a star, where we ran out of words, there were no more words left for us to use, would we be able to name the stars that God created? Just the ones we know about, not counting the ones that are probably out there we'll never know about. And the computer said, well, Tony, you'll have enough to create about 1 in every 10 trillion stars. If we used every word that humanity has ever created, 1 of every 10 trillion stars is all we would ever be able to name. But God can name them. He determined the number of stars, and He gave all of them their names. Isn't that amazing? God is so far beyond us. He has words that all of humanity would never be able to comprehend. And God knows every star and has given them their names. That means God's intimately aware of everything that He created. He didn't just create a bunch of stars and they're out there and He says, man, I created a lot of stars. I wonder what's going on with some of them. He knows every one of them. He is intimately familiar with them to the point where He named them. And if that doesn't tell us about the glory of God compared to humans, I don't know what else to say. But not only did He give every star His name, it tells us that He surely has not forgotten us. It tells us that surely if God knows every star that He created, not a one of us falls through the cracks in His sight. Not one of us gets lost. Not one of us is unknown. Not one of us escapes His attention. And as I'm going to posit, His great love for us. We look up and see endless galaxies, but He looks down and He sees us personally, intentionally, and with love. And that great God who keeps track of 200 billion trillion stars, He knows exactly how many hairs are on your head. Someone said that God perhaps created 100 billion souls since Adam. I don't know if that's true, but that's a lot of souls. And He knew every hair that He created on every one of those souls, including yours and mine. That's how closely He pays attention to His creation. And that's how deeply He cares for us. Jesus says in Luke chapter 12, verse 7, why even the hairs of your head are all numbered. This is what God said when He dwelt among us. Fear not. Are you of more value than the sparrows? That's what God was trying to tell us. Of all of the creation, God knows you intimately. God knows me intimately. And the God who created the vastness of the universe, that created everything that we talked about, that was to show His glory. Everything on earth shows us His love and how important He is to us and how much He cares. And I want to posit to you that if God knows every hair on every body that He has ever created, then there is no way we will ever fall through the cracks in His eyes. There is no way we will ever go unnoticed. There is no way that there will ever be a time where He does not know intimately what is going on with each of us. We are not lost in the vastness. We are loved in it. We are His focus. We are His purpose. And yes, we are His treasure. If the God who made the heaven knows every star, and if the God who formed us knows every hair on our head, then it should come to no surprise when all the places in the vast universe He could have visited, He chose to walk where we walk. He chose to dwell where His image bearers dwelt. The same Creator who spoke galaxies into existence once stepped into His own creation. Not as a distant observer, but as a loving Redeemer. There was a man who once walked on the moon. Only 12 people have ever done that. He's still alive. His name is James Irwin. As he stood on another world and looked up at the earth, he understood that truth better than anyone else. James Irwin said, God walking on earth is more important than man walking on the moon. A man who walked on another world realized that the most amazing thing about creation wasn't its vastness, it was its Creator's nearness to us. For the same Creator who hung every star also walked on the same soil that he created. And all of the expanse of the universe, this is where God came, because we were his purpose. 5 days spent creating our home, 1 day on everything else. What James Irwin said, and when he said that, captured something the Bible has been proclaiming all along. The most astonishing truth about creation isn't that God made it, it's that he entered it. And when he finished his work, from the galaxies above to the ground below our feet, God looked at everything and said, it was very good. Not just beautiful, not just vast, but good. Because it reflected his heart, his order, and his purpose. God said everything was good. And that reflects the great vastness that points to his glory, but also his intimacy and what he thinks about man and the relationship and the love that he has for us. All of it pointed back to the heart of the Creator. And that brings us really to the final truth of the story. That though we may not be the center of the universe, we truly are the center of the Creator's heart. And that's what we need to walk away understanding about the one who created the stars also. I do want to thank you for your attention this morning. We'll have a prayer and a song, and then be dismissed to our classes.